What if the most powerful force within you was never outside, but hidden right here inside your own body? For centuries, this force has been whispered about, feared, and even demonized. Not because it is evil, but because it is liberating. From the temples of Egypt to the monasteries of Tibet, from hermetic scrolls to tantric texts, the same secret appears again and again. There is a fire in us. A fire that can enslave when wasted, or illuminate when awakened. We live in a world overflowing with stimulation, yet starving for meaning. Sexuality has been turned into product, into guilt, into entertainment, everything but what it truly is. A sacred key to our own creativity, presence, and power. In this journey, we will walk through forgotten myths, ancient practices, and modern science to rediscover this fire. You will see how desire, often dismissed as something to suppress, can be transformed into clarity, magnetism, and even spiritual awakening. So let me ask you, if the fire of the gods was placed in your hands, would you let it burn you? Or would you dare to learn how to let it light your path? Let's begin. 1. The Forbidden Fire. Why sexual energy was hidden. What if the most powerful force inside you is the one you are taught to fear? From the very beginning of history, there has been a fire so close, so intimate, that most of us no longer see it. It is not outside, in the stars or in the heavens. It is right here, within our own bodies. This fire is called by many names: Kundalini, serpent energy, vital force. But at its core, it is the creative spark that animates everything. It is sexual energy, not just the urge to reproduce, but the raw fuel of life itself. The ancients tried to speak of this mystery in stories. In Greece, they told of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and gifted it to humanity. The punishment was eternal torment, chained to a rock, liver torn each day by an eagle. But hidden inside that myth is something more. Fire was not simply about warmth or cooking. It was the symbol of creation, of the divine force that could turn humans into more than mortals. The warning was clear. Whoever holds this fire holds the power to shape reality. And yet, if you look around today, you'll notice a strange paradox. We live in a world flooded with sexual imagery. Advertisements, films, music, social media, they bombard us with desire. But despite all this exposure, many people feel emptier than ever. Instead of being uplifted by this force, we are often drained by it. Instead of feeling alive, we feel addicted, restless, unsatisfied. The fire that should light our path has become smoke that blinds us. So why was this fire hidden in the first place? Not because it is dangerous in itself, but because of what it awakens in us. A man or woman who learns to channel their own energy no longer depends on outside authority. They no longer need a priest to speak to the divine, no ruler to grant them permission, no system to define their worth. They become a temple unto themselves. And that is the most revolutionary act of all. Perhaps this is the reason sexuality was turned into shame, into taboo, into sin. If you convince someone to fear their own fire, you make them easier to control. If you sever the link between their body and their spirit, you leave them wandering, searching for power outside while forgetting the power within. The lesson here is subtle but profound. The forbidden fire was never forbidden because it destroys. It was forbidden because it frees. And that freedom terrifies any system built on control. As we move forward, let us step deeper into the wisdom of the ancients, those who did not fear this fire, but honored it. From Egypt to India, they left behind traces of practices that show us how sexuality was once celebrated as sacred. And in that memory lies the map to reclaiming what was lost. 2. Ancient wisdom. From Egypt to Tantra. What if the body itself was once seen as a temple, and desire was the doorway to the divine? In the temples of ancient Egypt, the union of Isis and Osiris was not just a myth to be recited, it was a ritual to be embodied. To the Egyptians, sexuality was inseparable from resurrection, from the cycle of death and rebirth. To touch another was to participate in the eternal rhythm of creation itself. Far from sin, the act of love was a sacred key, a way of aligning human beings with the cosmic order. Across the sands of India, in the tantric traditions, the same truth echoed. Tantra taught that the body was not an obstacle to enlightenment, but the very vehicle for it. Every breath, every sensation, every moment of intimacy could be transformed into a spiritual practice. To unite with another was to mirror the great union of Shiva and Shakti, the masculine and feminine principles that hold the universe in balance. Even in Greece, the rites of Dionysus were wild, ecstatic, and deeply misunderstood. Outsiders saw drunkenness and chaos. But initiates knew these rituals were about dissolving the walls of the self, about entering a state where the divine could be tasted through the ecstasy of the body. This wisdom was not isolated. In Hermeticism, we find the symbol of the caduceus of Hermes, a central staff with two serpents intertwined. At first glance, it looks like medicine's emblem today, but its deeper meaning is extraordinary. The staff represents the human spine. The two serpents represent the currents of energy, masculine and feminine, lunar and solar, that rise within us. When they meet at the crown, consciousness awakens. The ancients encoded in symbols what modern science still struggles to explain, that our very bodies hold the ladder to the heavens. Now pause and compare this to the modern world. Today, sexuality is either commodified into entertainment or condemned as sin. It is rarely seen as sacred. We scroll through images, consume stimulation, or bury our desires under guilt and silence. Somewhere along the way, the thread was lost. The common mistake is thinking that body and spirit are enemies, that to be spiritual, we must abandon the flesh, or that to embrace desire, we must abandon spirit. This split has left us divided inside, chasing pleasure without depth, or chasing purity without wholeness. And in both cases, we lose the original wisdom. The ancients remind us of a simple but radical lesson. The body is not the prison of the soul. The body is the temple of the soul. To honor desire consciously is not to fall from grace, but to walk through the doorway into it. And so the question arises, if the ancients celebrated sexuality as sacred, why did later generations bury it under taboo and fear? To answer that, we must look at how power works, how institutions learned that controlling desire meant controlling people. Let's step into that turning point. 3. How power became shame. What if shame was never natural at all, but carefully taught? There was a time when sexuality was honored as a sacred fire. But history shows us how quickly fire can be turned into fear. Political powers and religious institutions understood something crucial. Whoever controls desire controls people. And so, instead of teaching human beings how to use the fire within them, they taught them to fear it. Instead of handing them the torch, they wrapped it in chains. Think of it this way. Imagine a society where everyone knew how to direct their inner energy, how to find joy, clarity, and strength from within. Such a person would not need intermediaries to speak with the divine. They would not need rulers to tell them how to live, nor authorities to decide what was pure and what was impure. They would already carry the temple inside themselves. That level of freedom terrified those who thrived on control. And so sexuality was rebranded. What was once initiation became sin. What was once ecstasy became guilt. What was once sacred union became forbidden desire. By placing a veil of shame over sexuality, institutions cut people off from their own source of power. They convinced humanity that the only way back to God was through their rituals, their dogmas, their rules. The metaphor of fire makes this crystal clear. Instead of teaching you how to cook, how to warm yourself, how to bring light into darkness, they taught you to recoil from the flame, to see it only as a threat. And the moment you believe fire is dangerous, you need someone else to hold it for you. You become dependent. This is why shame runs so deep in our culture. It is not an accident of psychology. It is not an inevitable part of desire. It is a tool wielded by systems of power to keep people small. The lesson is sobering but liberating. Shame is not who you are. It is not your natural response to desire. It was planted in you to make you forget your own fire. And once you recognize that, shame begins to lose its grip. But if this fire was hidden for so long, if generations were taught to fear it, how can we begin to understand what it truly is? To answer that, we must look within to the nature of the fire itself, the energy that lives inside each of us, waiting to be remembered. 4. The fire within. Understanding sexual energy. What if the very force you've been told is only about pleasure is also the same force that sustains your life, fuels your creativity, and connects you to the divine? Sexual energy is not just biology. It is survival. Yes, the drive to reproduce, to continue life. But it is also the spark of imagination, the force behind art, invention, and love. And deeper still, it is spiritual. It is the pulse that links you to something greater than yourself. To feel desire is not simply to crave, it is to touch the current of life itself. Picture it as water. Left uncontrolled, it can become a flood, crashing through everything in its path, leaving destruction behind. But when guided, when channeled, that same water spins turbines, lights cities, and gives life to millions. Sexual energy works the same way. If it spills without awareness, it depletes. But if it flows with direction, it creates. This is where so many fall into two common mistakes. Some let it run wild, chasing stimulation after stimulation, falling into patterns of addiction, dopamine hits from screens, endless searching for novelty. They feel alive for a moment, but end up drained, restless, and empty. Others swing to the opposite extreme, repression. They fear their own bodies, suffocate their desires, and live in constant tension. Wilhelm Reich, the psychoanalyst who dared to speak openly of this taboo, warned that repressed sexuality breeds neurosis. It doesn't vanish, it turns inward, becoming anxiety, illness, even rage. Both paths, dissipation and repression, miss the truth. The real secret lies not in wasting and not in denying, but in transforming. This is what the ancients called transmutation, to take the raw, instinctive fire and raise it into something luminous. It is not suppression, it is elevation. The lesson is simple, but life-changing. Sexual energy is neither your enemy nor your master. It is your raw material. What you do with it decides whether it burns you out or lights your way. And so the question naturally arises, how do we practice this art of transformation? How do we turn fire into light, water into power, desire into creation? To find the answer, we must step into the alchemist's workshop, the path of transmutation itself. 5. Transmutation. Turning lead into gold. What if desire itself was never meant to be silenced, but refined like lead transformed into gold? Transmutation is the forgotten art of working with sexual energy. It is not repression, not the cold act of locking desire away. It is also not indulgence, not the endless chase of fleeting pleasure. Transmutation is the middle path, the transformation of raw instinct into creative force, of fire into light. It is the alchemist's secret, to honor the material without being enslaved by it, to lift it into a higher form. Taoist master Mantak Chia teaches that the body is a microcosm of the universe, with rivers of energy meridians running through it. Sexual energy, he says, can be guided from the genitals up the spine, nourishing the organs, feeding the brain, strengthening the heart. Desire that once pulled us outward suddenly becomes fuel that turns inward, sustaining clarity and vitality. In the tantric traditions, this same process is described as the rising of Kundalini. Beginning at the root chakra, energy ascends the spinal column, opening each center of consciousness. One by one, instinct becomes intuition, pleasure becomes presence, and finally, at the crown, energy blossoms into pure awareness. Here, sexuality is not denied, but sanctified. Wilhelm Reich, standing in the West against the tide of oppression, saw what happens when energy is blocked. To repress desire, he warned, is to invite illness, neurosis, unrest. But to integrate it consciously, to allow it expression, while guiding its direction, is to unlock immense vitality. For Reich, this wasn't metaphorical. It was medicine for the modern soul. Think of it like food. If we consume mindlessly junk food, quick fixes, endless sugar, we weaken ourselves. But if we take the same raw ingredients and prepare them with care, they become nourishment, even medicine. Sexual energy is no different. Left unconscious, it drains us. Guided with awareness, it becomes superfood for the mind, the body, and the spirit. The lesson is clear. Whoever learns to direct their fire holds a limitless source of strength. Transmutation is not about rejecting who we are, but about discovering what we could be. And yet, knowing the principle is not enough. To truly walk this path requires practice disciplines, techniques, and rituals that train us to guide this energy every day. So how do we actually begin? To answer that, we must step onto the path itself, where practice becomes transformation. 6. The path of practice. How to work with this energy. What if the fire within you could be trained, shaped, and directed, just like a musician learns to play an instrument? Knowing about sexual energy is one thing. Living with it, guiding it, transforming it, that is where the true journey begins. The ancients understood that desire, left on its own, will always flow downward and outward. To reverse its course, to let it rise, requires practice. And not the kind of practice that gives instant results, but the kind that slowly reshapes your entire being. There are 3 gateways, 3 simple yet profound practices that open the path. The first is breathwork. In both yoga and Taoist traditions, breath is the bridge between body and mind. Through pranayama or Taoist breathing, we learn to draw energy upward, to expand the lungs not just with air, but life force. Each inhalation becomes a gathering of energy, each exhalation a release of tension. Over time, breath turns desire from something restless into something calm, powerful, and steady. The second is visualization. This is not fantasy but focus. Ancient practitioners imagined energy as light rising along the spine, like a serpent awakening from sleep. By guiding awareness to each point of the body, they trained the mind to direct the current upward from instinct at the root to clarity at the crown. The body becomes a map, and desire becomes the traveler moving toward higher ground. The third is conscious intimacy. Here lies one of the most misunderstood aspects of sexual alchemy. Many believe that to practice it, one must avoid sex altogether, that celibacy is the only path. But this is a mistake. The truth is more subtle. It is not about avoiding intimacy, but transforming it. When 2 partners come together with presence and intention, the act itself becomes a ritual. It is no longer about release, but about communion. In Tantra, a couple may spend hours not chasing climax, but extending connection, letting energy rise, letting the body become a temple. In such moments, sex ceases to be merely physical. It becomes sacred. Of course, this path is not easy. Desire is impatient. It wants quick satisfaction. But the fire only yields its higher gifts to those who are disciplined, patient, and willing to return to practice again and again. Just as muscles are strengthened through repetition, the inner channels are opened through daily devotion. The lesson is simple. Sexual alchemy is not theory, it is practice. And practice takes time. The fire does not obey impulse. It obeys intention. But once the fire begins to rise, once it is guided with consistency, something remarkable happens. The energy no longer just nourishes you. It begins to radiate outward, touching everything and everyone around you. This is where practice turns into presence, and presence turns into magnetism. 7. Magnetism. Becoming a living sun. What if your very presence could draw people in without you saying a word? When sexual energy is transmuted, it doesn't vanish. It changes form. What was once raw desire becomes something subtler, magnetism. It radiates as a field around you, like warmth from a fire or light from the sun. This is not poetry, it is real. Mystics have spoken of the aura for centuries, but today even science begins to catch a glimpse of it. Research at the HeartMath Institute shows that the human heart generates an electromagnetic field thousands of times stronger than that of the brain. This field can extend several feet beyond the body, subtly influencing others. Now imagine what happens when your vital energy is not leaking outward, but rising, nourishing, and amplifying this field. You don't just feel different, you become different. Think of Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest inventors of modern times. He often spoke of how he redirected his sexual energy into creative power. For him, discipline was not repression, but fuel. He understood that the same energy that could be lost in a moment of impulse could instead feed genius, invention, and vision. His presence itself was magnetic, because he carried a reservoir of untapped fire within him. Now compare this with what we often see around us. Someone addicted to constant stimulation porn, endless hookups, compulsive scrolling soon looks drained. Their eyes lose brightness, their posture slumps, their presence feels thin. They chase, but nothing sticks. Meanwhile, someone who conserves and channels their energy carries a different light. Their eyes are steady, their presence charged. People are drawn to them, not because of tricks or manipulation, but because they radiate something rare in this world: fullness. This is the paradox of magnetism. You don't have to run after what you want. You don't have to convince or beg. When you become a living source of energy, the world naturally responds. You attract because you overflow. You don't chase the flame, you become the sun. The lesson here is powerful. True influence is not about forcing attention, but about embodying energy so rich that attention naturally flows your way. But magnetism is not the final destination. It is a gift of the path, yes, but also a responsibility. For the brighter the fire burns, the more it reveals not only your light, but also your shadows. And this is why every tradition warns: power without purity can destroy. To move forward, we must confront the shadow side of this fire. 8. The shadow side. Why power without purity destroys. What if the same fire that can heal you could also burn everything you love to ashes? Sexual energy, once awakened, does not discriminate. It amplifies whatever it touches. If the heart is pure, it magnifies compassion, creativity, presence. But if the heart is clouded by greed, fear, or ego, that same energy fuels obsession, addiction, even destruction. This is why the ancients warned: the fire will reveal who you are. We can see this shadow side throughout history. There are leaders who discovered the magnetic pull of sexual energy, but chose to twist it. Some cult figures, instead of guiding their followers to freedom, used this force to manipulate, to exploit, to enslave. What could have been a path to liberation became a tool of control. The tragedy is not that they awakened the fire, it's that they awakened it without purifying their intention. The truth is simple but sobering. Energy does not make you better. It makes you more. If there is insecurity, it becomes arrogance. If there is fear, it becomes domination. If there is lust without love, it becomes addiction. Sexual energy is like electricity. It can power a city or it can burn it down. The difference lies not in the current itself, but in how it is directed. This is why every authentic tradition insisted on purification of the heart before intensification of the fire. Meditation, service, compassion, honesty, these were not side practices, they were the foundation. Without them, the flame becomes dangerous. With them, the flame becomes light. The lesson is clear. Before seeking more power, seek more clarity. Before awakening the serpent, cleanse the heart. Only then does the energy serve you, rather than enslave you. And this brings us to a practical question. If we purify our hearts and guide our energy, what can this fire create in the modern world? How does sexual alchemy show up not in myths or temples, but in our daily lives, our love, our work, our creativity? To answer that, we must look at the real applications of this ancient art today. 9. Applications in modern life. What if the secret to love, creativity, and success wasn't something outside to chase, but the way you use the fire already inside you? Sexual alchemy may sound like an ancient practice, but its power shows up in the most ordinary places of our modern lives. In love, for instance, most people enter relationships from a place of lack, needing the other to complete them, to validate them, to feel an emptiness inside. This dependency often breeds jealousy, control, and disappointment. But when you know how to channel your own energy, you no longer come to love as a beggar, you come as a giver. Desire is no longer about possession, but about communion. The result is a relationship that feels whole, where intimacy deepens instead of drains. In the realm of creativity, sexual energy is pure rocket fuel. Every artist, musician, or entrepreneur knows the restless fire of inspiration. It is the same energy that once pulled us toward pleasure. Transmuted, it becomes the drive to paint, to compose, to innovate. Nikola Tesla famously redirected his sexual energy into invention, saying that his discipline allowed him to access extraordinary insights. For him, desire didn't vanish. It simply shifted into the brilliance of his work. The same applies to work and leadership. Focus, presence, and charisma are all amplified when energy is conserved and directed. Think of athletes who practice sexual discipline before major competitions, conserving their energy to channel it into performance. Or Steve Jobs, who through Zen practices learned to cultivate focus so sharp it reshaped entire industries. These figures remind us that productivity and creativity are not just about talent, they are about energy management. Now consider the contrast. Someone who dissipates their energy endlessly through compulsive distractions, shallow pleasures, or constant overstimulation struggles to focus, struggles to create, struggles to lead. Meanwhile, someone who knows how to harness the same energy radiates vitality, clarity, and vision. The difference is not luck, but direction. The lesson here is profound. Sexual alchemy is not about denial or indulgence. It is about transformation. It turns productivity into purpose, intimacy into sacred connection, and spirituality into lived presence. It is the bridge that unites every dimension of life because it works with the very force that animates them all. And so the question becomes, if this fire can heal relationships, fuel creativity, and sharpen leadership, what happens when we reclaim it fully? What is the true payoff of living as someone who no longer fears their own energy, but embodies it? For that, we turn to the final step, the return of the forbidden fire. 10. The payoff. Reclaiming the forbidden fire. What if the very thing you were taught to fear was the greatest gift you were ever given? Sexual energy is not a curse. It was never meant to be hidden in shame or wasted in distraction. It is the original gift, the fire of life itself, placed in your hands. And when you reclaim it, you begin to understand that the body is not the enemy of the spirit, but its temple. We've walked a long journey together, from Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, to the temples of Egypt and the rituals of Tantra, where sexuality was honored as sacred. We saw how power turned that fire into shame, cutting humanity off from its own strength. We looked at the paradox of our modern world drowned in stimulation, yet starved for meaning. And then we rediscovered the path of transmutation, the art of turning raw desire into creativity, into presence, into magnetism. The truth is simple, but life-changing. You don't attract what you ask for. You attract what you become. When you become radiant, life responds with radiance. When you overflow with presence, people and opportunities flow to you. The fire doesn't just change what you feel, it changes who you are, and the world reshapes itself around that. So I leave you with a question. If you had the fire of the gods in your hands, would you let it burn you? Or would you let it light your path? If this exploration stirred something in you, I invite you to share your own reflections below. How do you experience this fire in your life? And if you want to keep walking this path of hidden wisdom, don't forget to subscribe. Because the journey is far from over, there are still more doors of forbidden knowledge waiting to be opened together.